I'll be live.
It was loading up. It's
All
still
right.
loading.
All
All
right.
right,
Give
go.
me
Yeah.
a,
Okay, now. Oh, yeah, we're
I'll be
live.
live.
Yep, you're live.
Okay, good. Um, Good evening. The League of Women Voters of the Hamptons, Shelter Island, and the North Fork, co-sponsored by the leagues of Brookhaven, Smithtown, and Huntington, covered the whole of Suffolk County there, um, are pleased to present this debate between the Democratic candidates for the first congressional district of Long Island. They are John Avlon and Nancy Goroff. I'm Judy Roth, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. And Eileen Mercer will be the timer, and Ann Marshall is our backup moderator. Right now, please join us at home for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The League of Women Voters is a trusted, nonpartisan, political national organization. We do not endorse candidates or parties, but we are very involved in the issues that are important to our community. We hold forums, we provide educational material, we do voter registration, and of course, we also run debates. The order of the debate this evening will be as follows. Each candidate will have a 2-minute opening statement. Each candidate will then be given 2 minutes to respond to each question which will be asked. They also have an opportunity for a rebuttal, and that will be 1 minute, and they will let me know that by raising their hand. Then each candidate will have a 1-minute closing statement in the reverse order of how we began. So we will start with A and then go to G. And your timer, Eileen, will hold up 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, and stop. So, everybody ready?
Yes.
Okay. The first, Mr. Avlon, you have your opening statement.
Thank you. And thank you to the League of Women Voters. Your work over a century has been so important in just elevating the debates in our democracy, shedding more light than heat, which is something we can use. So I appreciate you, and it's an honor to participate in this debate. I'm John Avlon, and I'm running for Congress here in New York 1 because I just believe there's so much at stake for our country and for our community. We're in a dangerous place. We're on a knife's edge. We live in the greatest country in the world. I'm the grandson of immigrants, and they taught me that you cannot take the blessings of American democracy for granted. But American democracy is under threat. I think we can all see that. And that's why it's so vitally important that Democrats take back the House of Representatives, that we build a broad patriotic coalition to do so, because that's what it takes in a swing seat. And I look at this election, despite all the challenges, with an enormous sense of optimism. You know, I left being an anchor at CNN to run because my wife and I deeply felt that we didn't want to look back and say we could have done more when it mattered most. And for all the serious challenges we face and all the long odds in winning a swing district that has been held by Republicans for a decade, this is a swing district. That's an enormous opportunity for us to make our voices heard. Because before the last decade, there was Tim Bishop for 12 years. This is a swing district. And swing district means that our vote counts. Part of the problem in our politics is that 80% of Americans don't live in a district that has competitive general elections. We can. But that requires the politics of addition, not division. It requires firing up the base and reaching out and winning over independent voters and even some Republicans. And that gives us an even deeper opportunity, I think, to not only break the fever of Trumpism, which has divided our country, but to start building a new kind of politics that delivers common sense solutions. The stakes of the race are protecting reproductive freedom, something I care deeply about, Even though we live in New York, don't sleep on the fact that if folks vote Republican this election, they're going to be voting for a speaker for whom a national abortion ban has been on the to-do list forever. We need to deal with the affordability crisis. When I knock on doors from Northport to Greenport, I hear this constantly. Frustration about grocery prices, frustration at
Okay.
restaurants.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so
Stop.
sorry. I missed that. Okay.
Okay.
I misunderstood my time. My apologies.
Okay. Stop. Okay. Ms. Goroff?
Thank you, Judy. I want to thank you and Eileen and the League of Women Voters. This is just so important. Suffolk County is my home. It's where I raised my kids. It's where I built my career. 3 years ago, in the school district next door to mine, 3 right-wing MAGA extremists were elected to the school board in the May elections. That was a wake-up call for many, and a group of us responded by forming a new organization. We came together to form a group which we call the Long Island Strong Schools Alliance, to advocate for our public schools and for making sure that every school is a place where each child feels a sense of belonging, no matter who they are. We have been pushing back against this extremism, making sure that we are protecting our schools and protecting our kids. We have a nonpartisan political action committee that has helped many candidates get elected, and we have beaten over 25 MAGA extremist candidates in school board elections. But at the national level, we are seeing that things are just as bad as ever. And our representative, our representative, Nick LaLota, is part of that terrible picture. We absolutely deserve better than what LaLota is doing for us. He has been all talk and no action. And so I am running to make sure that we protect our democracy and women's reproductive freedom, that we deal with the affordability crisis that is affecting so many people here, especially on housing, and that we make sure we are protecting our communities, whether from gun violence or from the effects of extreme weather and climate change. I'm very excited to answer questions today, and I look forward to our conversation. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. So the first question will go to Mr. Avlon. There are endless political wars in Congress among factions both within Democratic and the Republican Party. On what issues would you personally work across the aisle? And are you someone who is open to compromise to get a bill passed that may not be perfect, but is good?
We can't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And the American democracy was founded on constructive, principled compromise. That's the story of the Constitution. We're imperfect people working to form a more perfect union. And I absolutely believe that you need to work with people of good faith around common facts to find common ground and then to find common sense solutions on the issues we confront. That's the only way we're going to solve anything. Frankly, that's how we're going to get the middle 60 to support immigration reform. Comprehensive immigration reform is necessary. Everyone's going to have to give a little bit, but we need to stop demonizing migrants and start strengthening our immigration system so it's a source of people have faith in it again, because immigration is a renewable source of strength. That's the way we're going to get anything big done. Look at what Joe Biden did with the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act, whose impact is still yet to be felt. Ultimately, the things I care most about are strengthening American democracy, healing our divides, and rebuilding the middle class. And any progress we make is going to be because we find a way to find common ground. That's just essential. And that's reflected in the politics I've believed in since I first got involved in politics. I got inspired by Bill Clinton's campaigns when I was in college. That third way approach, opportunity, responsibility, and community. That's when I became a Democrat. As a journalist, I've taken on the far right, but I've also spoken about the need for us to find the areas we can agree on, because I've been warning about the dangers of polarization and hyperpartisanship in all my books, from Washington's Farewell to my most recent on Abraham Lincoln. I care deeply about our country, and I know our country only works when we find ways to find common ground and elevate the debate and work towards common sense solutions. And I know after this fever breaks, we can do it again, but it's going to take leadership from all of us.
Ms. Goroff?
Thank you for the question. I believe that to find real solutions to complex problems, you need to listen to all stakeholders, no matter what side of an issue they see themselves. We absolutely have to listen to people who are on the other side, if we want to call it that, and hear what their concerns are and work with them. And we saw that happen in the Senate on immigration and border security. We saw conservative Senator James Lankford come together with Senate Democratic leadership and work on border security and come up with a deal. And then we saw what happened next, which is that Donald Trump said, don't pass this deal. I want to talk about it in November. And Nick LaLota went right along with Donald Trump and said it was a terrible deal, even before he knew what was in it. We need partners who are really serious about solving these problems. Nick LaLota is not one of those people. He is more interested in political stunts than in actually solving the problems. And the people of this district deserve someone who is going to go work with everyone and solve problems. And that is what I plan to do. It's what I've done in my whole career when I figured out how to get healthcare for workers at Stony Brook who were not covered as employees. And it is what I will do. It's also what I did with the Long Island Strong Schools Alliance, which is a nonpartisan organization where we do not ask people their party affiliation. Very proud of that work and that problem-solving track record. And it is absolutely what I intend to do in Washington. Thank you.
Okay. The next question starts with Ms. Goroff. Many parents with young children often cannot work because they cannot find childcare they can afford. Do you think the federal government should play a role in creating more childcare opportunities? And could you also speak to the child tax care credit?
Yeah, I think that thank you for that question. The child tax credit is one of the most successful policies that we've had in recent years. That is, in the year that it was in effect as an expanded tax credit because of the pandemic, we cut the child poverty level in half. That's just an incredible accomplishment. Now Republicans have refused to maintain those expanded levels, and we need to bring those back. So many working families depend on this, and we want to make sure that our children, regardless of where the situation of their birth, have a real opportunity to succeed in life. So we should certainly be bringing back that tax credit. We need to be looking at ways for the government to help expand childcare options and help expand funding for those services, because it is so critically important for our working people to be able to have to have affordable childcare. And beyond that, it is an issue of equity. It's equity, and it is beyond that. We want to make sure that we are getting the best and most productive use of people in our economy. Our economy depends on everyone being able to work who wants to. And the lack of childcare stifles our economy and new business development, as well as hurting our children.
Mr. Avlon?
My wife and I have two young kids, and so I appreciate how raising young kids can feel like a countercultural activity. And I do believe that a lot of the divisions in our politics today are because a lot of working families and middle-class families feel that the system isn't working for them. Right? It works for the super rich or the big corporations, but we as Democrats need to make an extra effort to reach out and to make sure that we are strengthening the middle class and making it easier to raise a family. It's particularly obviously an issue here on Long Island, given the cost of housing, the affordability crisis at the grocery store. But you asked specifically about the child tax credit, and that's something I'm incredibly passionate about. I think the first two ways the next Democratic Congress can deal with the affordability crisis is by restoring the state and local tax deduction, which will put an average of $10,000 back in working families' pockets, and then expanding the child tax credit because it did cut poverty in half in the year it existed. That's a start. That's a down payment on showing that we can deliver for working families and middle-class families, making life just a little bit easier. That couldn't be more important. And we look back on the debates like paid child family leave that was, demonized when it was done and now is taken for granted. We need to be doing more. Every step of the way, I think every economic question we face needs to be put through the prism of, does it strengthen the middle class? Does it make it easier to raise a family? Does it help more people achieve the American dream? And if Democrats focus on that, and Joe Biden has been focused on that for a long time, we'll start to regain trust and faith. And I think that's one of the ways we win, not just flip the seat, but then hold on to it. So it's critically important that working families and middle-class families feel that Democrats have their back and that together we can restore all the promise that involves living on Long Island.
Okay. The next question, we'll start with Mr. Avlon, and you've both addressed this in your opening statement. So Eileen, let's just do this question for 1 minute, because it is about the legislators looking to ban abortion nationwide, also medical abortions, as well as possibly contraceptives. And you both spoke about it, but why don't you just take a minute to speak about it now?
Sure. Look, this is an issue that could not be more urgent. And actually, the first political belief I remember having that was based in policy was being pro-choice. It just always seemed to me wrong that anyone thought they could make that decision for anybody else. And I believe the vast majority of Americans believe that it's a decision that should be between a woman, her doctor, and her God, not the government. But we saw that the Supreme Court justices lied to the American people in the Senate. They said it was stare decisis. Then they overturned it the first chance they got. And now we've opened Pandora's box. IVF bans, returns to laws from 1864, debates about making contraception illegal. So Democrats need to get elected to Congress in order to defend reproductive freedom. And we really can't forget that Republicans have a national abortion ban on their to-do list. This is urgent. This is basic. This is something that should unite us. And remember, as Nancy Pelosi once said, you don't need to be a woman to vote right on women's rights. And that's what I believe.
Okay. Ms. Goroff, 1 minute.
Thank you. I am lucky enough to be the mother of 2 adult children and to have gone through 2 healthy pregnancies with no problems. But as a woman, I just can't even imagine the idea of somebody else, and especially some men in Washington, whether in Congress or at the Supreme Court, having the ability to say what would happen with my body. I have been a very long time staunch advocate for reproductive freedom and women's bodily autonomy, and very proud that last year I was given the local Planned Parenthood Hudson Peconics Impact Award for my work defending reproductive freedom. We do need to worry about possibilities of national bans, of restrictions on contraception, of restrictions on medical abortion. And we need to worry about that not only for people in New York, where it is still a threat, but also elsewhere in the country. And I will make sure to defend those rights.
Okay, thank you. The next question will start with Ms. Goroff. Our district has a very large number of members of the armed services, both active and retired. What will you do to support this population?
Yeah, our armed service veterans and active members deserve to have their commitment to our country met with similar commitment from our country to them. That means making sure that our VA hospitals and VA homes for retired veterans are doing what they should be doing and are meeting the needs of the people here who have served in the armed services. So the VA hospital in Northport absolutely needs oversight. There have been issues, especially with women vets there, having access to female doctors for their care. and we need to make sure that they are getting the care they need. One of the ways that I see the role of being a member of Congress is that it's not just about legislation. It's also about making sure that every constituent gets access to the parts of the government they need. And if they're having a problem with one part of the government, that they have help and they have a representative who will speak up for them and make sure they're getting the answers that they deserve. That's why my first step when I am elected will be to set up an Office of Constituent Services that is efficient, effective, and transparent, so that all constituents, no matter what the problem is they have, and whether it's with the federal government or with local levels of government, because certainly here on Long Island, we have many, many levels of government, that whichever level of government they're trying to access, they have a place to go to get help with that. And that certainly includes making sure we're living up to our responsibilities to our vets.
Thank you. Mr. Avlon?
Of course, constituent service is key to any congressional office, and we can help people navigate the thicket of bureaucracy that exists so they feel that they've got an advocate in Washington. But this is also a deeper issue that we've been unfortunately divided on in different times in our recent history. For me, it's very clear that our military men and women are heroes, that freedom isn't free, that they have earned our eternal respect, and we should celebrate their achievements, and then make sure that when they get home, they don't feel forgotten. Because as you know, the suicide rate among military veterans is much higher than the national average. That's speaking to a deeper pain that's not being addressed. And some friends like Seth Moulton in Congress have taken a leading step to make sure that there are hotlines for people who are in mental distress. But we need to make sure that the services are being delivered in places like the Northport VA, that everyone has access. I was speaking to an older gentleman at the JCC, and he was expressing real frustration that because he made over a certain amount, he wasn't getting the healthcare services he believed he had earned, and he had earned as a veteran of our foreign wars. So we need to make sure the system is working efficiently, effectively, that the care is first rate, because that's part of honoring our military men and women. And we need to make sure they feel honored. And we're setting a societal example that says we honor people who sacrifice for something larger than themselves. And we owe them our thanks and our freedom and our democracy.
Okay. So the next question, we go back to beginning with Mr. Avlon. Suffolk County farmers produce vegetables and fruits, they grow vineyards, trees, ornamental shrubs. Many federal programs benefit large farms. What can you do in Congress to help our small local farmers?
It's a great and important question, because the agricultural culture here in Suffolk County is robust, and it depends disproportionately on small farms. They create the character, the unique character of our communities. I was talking to John Halsey about this, who's founder of the Peconic Land Trust, about legislation he had worked on with Tim Bishop back in the day that would help individual family farms stay in their family's hands by allowing the estate taxes to sort of be carried forward as long as it remained a family farm. I do think that small businesses need to know that we've got their back, because too often that curse of bigness threatens to commoditize everything and have large agricultural bureaucracies take over everything. And it does disrupt our culture. We want family farms. We need the open spaces. It's one of the reasons I'm honored to have the support of Fred Thiel, this legendary assemblyman here from out east, because he developed the CPF funds that helped preserve the open spaces. But we can and need to do more. Frankly, it's another reason we need to have comprehensive immigration reform, because those H-2A and H-2B visas that farmers depend on for temporary workers get stifled, and everybody gets degraded. It doesn't work economically. It doesn't work until we have those visas in place. So we need those temporary worker visas to help our local farmers. But there is everything we can and should do as Democrats, as members of Congress, to make sure that small family businesses know that we've got their back, because too often they feel like the system works for the big guys and not for them. And that's something we can do and we need to do, because the unique character of our communities can't be taken for granted. It's why we're lucky to live here.
Okay. Ms. Goroff?
The pandemic showed us many things about our society that some things which we hoped were not true. One of the things it showed us is the danger of consolidating so much of our agriculture into very few producers. And for example, among pork meat packers, there are basically 5 large producers and distributors who handle something like 90% of all pork products in this country. And we saw the risks to our supply chains of having this consolidation, in addition to the importance of small family farms for the character of our communities. And of course, our East End is filled with small farms, which we all have enjoyed for many years. Congress every 5 years passes a farm bill, and the next farm bill is due for renewal next year, and the negotiations have been going on now. We need to make sure that in the next farm bill, we are not subsidizing big ag, the Monsantos of the world and the Archer's Daniel Midlands of the world, and we are instead making sure that small farmers get their share of government help when they need it. We need to make sure they have the workers to do their work and tend their crops. And that means looking for ways to have enough temporary workers to help them where needed with seasonal work. The government has a responsibility not only to the small farmers, but also to all of us as consumers, that they are going to strengthen and diversify our food chain. It is better for the environment, it is better for our farmers, and it is better for us and our health.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're segueing right into climate change. Ms. Goroff, climate change has been cited as the cause of global warming, forest fires, tornadoes, and other natural disasters. What do you believe that Congress should be doing to deal with the problems caused by climate change?
Thank you. This is an issue that I have cared deeply about and worked on for decades. I'm proud to be a member of the Union of Concerned Scientists and their National Advisory Board. And we know climate change is an existential threat. We live on an island. Coastal erosion, extreme weather, sea level rise, these things all threaten our way of life. In order to combat climate change, we need to take ambitious, sustained, committed effort. That means that we need to move to being carbon neutral in our energy production in this country by 2035. We need to be carbon neutral overall, including with vehicles and buildings and roads and concrete, as soon after that as we can, but definitely by 2050. The Inflation Reduction Act includes many terrific proposals to move us towards the infrastructure we need for this action. Now we need to make sure that that money is distributed and as efficiently and quickly as possible, and that we are providing oversight to make sure that we are looking at which projects that have been funded are going to be most effective, because we need to make sure that dollars spent on this, we get the most bang for the buck we can. We also need to invest in technologies of tomorrow so that countries that are not as well off as the US can also afford to move to renewable energy. And that is critically important because carbon produced anywhere affects all of us everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Avlon?
Look, the fact that we've got 1,000 miles of coastline means that everyone on Long Island is impacted by climate change. We all understand that in Suffolk County, the environment is the economy is the environment, fishing and farming. We all need clean water. We all need to take steps to mitigate climate change and then innovate our way out of this crisis. And while it's great that many Republicans talk a lot about and sometimes act to make environmental steps. In Washington, when they get there, they try to cut the funding that Democrats have allocated to combat our climate change. And yet I'm hopeful because it's no longer plausible to be in denial. We see flooding in Port Jeff and so many of our communities. We're going to need to invest in mitigation. There are things we can do in the federal government to coordinate local efforts, sustain beach renourishment efforts that began with FIMP. That is incredibly important. Because sand is better than revetments and walls in many cases. We need to make sure we're helping towns harden, that it's tax deductible for individuals and businesses, as well as communities to make their properties more resilient. But then we need to shift to innovation. And here's where things get interesting. It's not just the money that's been set aside. I think Long Island can take a real leadership position in clean green technologies. If you look at the intersection between Brookhaven National Labs and Stony Brook, that's a place where next generation technologies and new businesses can and will be created. We have the tools here. And if we can make sure that we're an engine of innovation that innovates our way out of this problem, it will help make Long Island a leader and New York a leader. It's great we're a leader in wind power. I like to see New York lead. We have the opportunity to depolarize this debate and make real measurable progress. That's the challenge of our time, one of the major challenges of our time, and we need to embrace it head on.
Okay. So the next question, also a challenge of our time. Mr. Avlon, should Congress play a role in restricting or regulating social media and AI? And please comment on the TikTok controversy.
Yes, they should. I ran a digital news media business for many years. And so I have an understanding of how algorithms work, about how disinformation can be proliferated. My segment on CNN for many years was called Reality Check, where I held Donald Trump to account to his lies, but I also confronted disinformation and analyzed how it infects our civic debates and distorts them and makes us feel more divided than we really are. So it's urgent. This is one of the key challenges to American democracy. We need to combat digital disinformation. There are algorithm reform bills that would create more transparency. Companies should be responsible for the impacts of their algorithms when they promote extremism in the name of increased engagement. That's on them. Section 230 shouldn't apply to that, which was an outdated law that created the rules of the road and the internet such as they are in the 1990s. We need to be combating digital disinformation. And with regard to TikTok, I don't think it's a surprise that we see disinformation and disaffection rising among young people. The number of Democratic committee members I've spoken to throughout the district whose kids were in despair because their kids are disengaged. It reminds me of something a Ukrainian journalist once told me, that the goal of Russian disinformation isn't to convince, it's to confuse, it's to increase cynicism. We wouldn't have let the Soviet Union control a major newspaper chain during the Cold War. And so I think it's appropriate to insist on American ownership for TikTok because the vast majority of people under 35 get their news from TikTok. All of this is an urgent challenge. It's not just dealing with digital disinformation, it's strengthening the guardrails around our democracy for the 21st century. And we need members of Congress who understand that digital landscape and who can confront the disinformation head on, something I care deeply about. Fundamentally, and my experience is directly relevant to that challenge.
Ms. Goroff?
Thank you. We are facing so many different sources of disinformation for not just elections, but for every aspect of our society. Our children are bombarded with messages, and sometimes, depending on what they have chosen to look at, they get shown more and more distressing and shocking images because of the algorithms at play, whether it's on TikTok or on other social media. When we have a platform like TikTok, or formerly Twitter, now X, or Facebook, we need to make sure that those platforms are providing viewers and readers with the information they claim to be providing, right? And so we absolutely do need to make sure that there are guardrails in place. I have been very proud to be a founding member of an organization called the Institute for Digital Media and Child Development, also known as Children and Screens. We provide reliable information based on research, both for parents and policymakers, about the effects of social media on children. And it is clear whether you are talking about toddlers or adolescence or anything in between, and probably for many of us as adults, for that matter, social media and access to screens have very serious impacts on children's self-esteem, on their understanding of where they fit in the world. And so we must be looking at how we make sure that the information there is regulated to be accurate or honest, or at least transparent where it comes from. I do believe in free speech. We also need to make sure our platforms are not misleading people.
Thank you. Continuing with you, Ms. Goroff, well, another issue that has divided Congress is about gun control and gun violence. What legislation would you support to deal with the problems of gun violence in our country?
Thank you. It is absolutely heartbreaking to see over and over and over again the effects of gun violence in the form of mass shootings in so many parts of our country. We are very fortunate here in New York to have some of the strongest gun safety legislation in the country. And for that reason, we also have one of the lowest incidents of gun violence in the country, one of the lowest rates. We need to make sure that similar legislation is applicable to the whole country to keep people safe. That means making sure we reestablish the assault weapons ban, because when we had an assault weapons ban, gun violence was much, much lower than it is now. And as soon as we got rid of the assault weapons ban, it came back to former levels. We need to make sure we have universal background checks, and we close the loopholes for private sales, and we make sure we close the loopholes for waiting periods for those background checks to be completed. Some of that has been done in recent legislation that Republicans are now challenging. We need to protect our children and our communities from this cycle of violence by establishing very strong national gun safety legislation. And I am very proud to be a Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate.
Avlon?
I'm also proud to be a Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate. I'm incredibly honored to have the support of Linda and Michael Schulman, who lost their son Scott in Parkland. They transformed their grief into constructive action, and they teach us about the steps we need to take to combat violence prevention and increase gun safety. As a journalist, I can't tell you how many mass shootings I covered, how many times we had to confront the cycle of grief, how many times we would read all the mass shootings that never even make the news. America has a problem. And it's not about state laws. Some states have better laws than others, but we have porous borders in between the states when it comes to illegal guns. Congress can and should do more. President Biden's right to be pushing for a renewal of the assault weapons ban, but we need to deal with ghost guns. We need to close the gun loophole with violent history background checks. That's something the vast majority of Americans agree on. We need to work with law enforcement to get illegal guns off our street. Democrats can and should find common cause with law enforcement to get illegal guns off our streets. The tragedy, the heartbreak, how many more times does it have to happen here? The Supreme Court's made it more difficult. A completely ahistorical reading of the Second Amendment. But we need to confront that with determination. We need to restore common sense and turn our common grief into common sense action. And that's what I'll do as a member of Congress.
Okay. Moving for a moment to international issues, foreign affairs. Mr. Avlon, do you believe that the United States should be doing more or less to support Ukraine?
More. More, because history teaches us that the way to stop bullies is with strength, that it is far less expensive to stop an aggressor, an autocratic army from invading a democracy at its source rather than when the war widens. Bullies only respect strength. And I believe Joe Biden's been right about this from the beginning. The defining struggle of our time is autocracies versus democracy. Unfortunately, it's at home and abroad. But this is about democracies abroad. We need to be forming leagues of democracy to stand up to our autocratic challengers. We need to make sure that we are repelling anytime autocrats try to invade the sovereignty of another nation, because it's far cheaper. And the part of the stakes of this election, make no mistake, it's about the trajectory of the 21st century. Donald Trump's told us that, and this is what we could say to our Republican friends, not only is he not going to deter Russian aggression, he's saying that Vladimir Putin can have Ukraine, half of it at least. He's saying that he'll work to undermine NATO. And that, of course, gives a green light to China with Taiwan. All these things are connected. We need to take a strong line and support democracies against tyrants. We need to take a strong line and support our allies and democracies against terrorists. That's part of what it means to be a leader and a force for good in the world. And the international institutions that were built after the Second World War that the US pioneered, like NATO, have proved their relevance now more than ever. And I think Joe Biden deserves great credit for strengthening those institutions. We need to stand with Ukraine against Putin's expansionist ambitions. And the fact that the Republicans let the Ukrainian people dangle for 6 months while playing politics to Donald Trump's tune is a disgrace that the eyes of history will record.
Ms. Goroff?
Thank you. We owe it to our allies to continue to provide the support they need and to lead in the international arena. We also owe it to ourselves. We get tremendous strength and benefit by being leaders. And providing funding to Ukraine is one of the most cost-effective ways we can do this. If we do not provide funding and support to Ukraine to allow them to push back against this autocratic expansionist attack, we are going to have to face Russia as soon as they are done with Ukraine, when they start to move across the border to Poland or to whichever country they decide to attack next, which is in NATO. We have seen it in history, and we know how important it is to show that we are standing with them. And so it's ironic, it's beyond ironic, that Republicans like Nick LaLota have been willing to leave Ukraine dangling for months and months while making up reasons why they didn't want to take up proper funding, instead of providing the support that we needed. And it was both understandable and very disturbing that last week President Biden had to apologize to the president of Ukraine for having left them for so long this way. We absolutely need to make sure they have the support they need so that they can fight this fight, because they're fighting it for us and for all democracies.
Thank you. Ms. Goroff, continuing with you. Israel has been severely criticized for its response to the deadly Hamas attacks on October 7th. Where do you stand on U.S. support for Israel and on the just recently passed UN resolution supporting the U.S. proposal for peace?
Thank you. As a Jewish American, this is an issue that has been very important to me for many years. And I do believe firmly 100% in Israel's right to exist and right to defend itself. At the same time, I believe that Bibi Netanyahu has not been doing his country or anyone else any favors in the way that he has prosecuted this war against the Palestinians. If you start your history on October 7th in that region or on October 8th, you are missing a lot of history. And if you start your history in 1948, you are still missing a lot of history. There are layers upon layers upon layers, and we need to be making sure that we are both helping our allies, for example, with the Iron Dome that allows Israel to protect itself, and also holding them accountable. we must move forward towards a real regional comprehensive security agreement. This is the only way that we're going to have a lasting peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We need our Arab allies to help, whether that's Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. They all need to provide funding, to provide logistical support so that we can have a demilitarized Palestinian state side by side with Israel. It's the only way we are going to ever get through this and actually get to a solution. And I am glad to see the Biden administration and Antony Blinken, who seems to be every other week in the Middle East and is back there again now, pushing for real solutions here.
Thank you. Mr. Avlon?
We need to stand with our allies. We need to stand with our democracies. We need to stand with the victims of terrorism and never blame the victims of terrorism. And I was beyond disturbed. I was outraged to see, in the wake of the horrific attacks of October 7th, so many people trying to find ways to blame Israel for the suffering that was just inflicted on it. There's no moral equivalence. Now, obviously, we need to make sure that humanitarian aid gets in. Civilian casualties have been far too high. We do need to move ultimately towards a two-party state with a demilitarized Palestinian state. But Hamas needs to be eradicated. It shouldn't be legitimized. The people of Gaza are being held hostage in part, was sparked by Hamas's action. And I think we need to get out of this sense. The voting for the other night, I was asked whether I would have voted for Israel. Absolutely. Not least of which because it funded the Iron Dome, which has helped this situation from escalating even further, as horrific as it has been. It also provides $10 billion for development and for aid and for rebuilding Gaza, which is going to be necessary on the other side of this. Now, I think we need broad bipartisan support for the state of Israel. I think Bibi Netanyahu has hurt that. For too long, people have said that you need to be supporting Netanyahu's policies or you don't support Israel. That's nonsense. Personally, I'm more of a Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid kind of guy politically. But we need to keep our eye on the stakes here and not get dragged into moral equivalence. And I believe deeply that if people are not Jewish in America, we have a unique and special responsibility to stand up to anti-Semitism and to stand up for the state of Israel, to make sure there is broad bipartisan support for Israel. And that's what I'll do in Congress, 100%.
Okay. Mr. Avlon, actually, the next question has to do with anti-Semitism, the rise of anti-Semitism since the Gaza attack and Israel's response, and the university protests, free speech, protected speech. What do you think that would Congress be doing anything about this? The questions which were asked to the college presidents. What's your take on this whole issue?
I think that sometimes the debates we get in that seem clouded and confused can be clarified by taking a step back and by applying values rather than trying to gauge the politics of the moment. I think standing up for liberal values means standing up against illiberalism wherever we see it. I think one of the rules when I wrote the Code of Ethics for the Daily Beast was a reminder to journalists that it's a good idea to stand up to the mob of the moment, wherever it comes from. That, of course, we need to have free speech, and peaceful protests are protected by the Constitution. But when they get violent, they're no longer a peaceful protest. That's a riot. And we need to have great constructive debates, but that is dependent upon civil discourse and common facts. And the hate that we have seen infusing so many of these debates, the fact that there seems to be a double standard about what constitutes free speech, that's all part of what muddies our conversation. So let's stand up for liberal values consistently. It'll be clarifying. Take a step back and think about how things will be seen in the rearview mirror of history. Apply the lessons of history. And that's something I do as an author and historian and journalist. I try to study the roots of anti-Semitism as one of the seeds of extremism that we deal with today. It's unacceptable. It's an ancient virus of hate. And we need to confront it and condemn it wherever we see it, because we need to elevate people on the basis of our common humanity.
Did you just get frozen?
Oh,
I think he got
He is
frozen.
frozen.
yes, he did.
Uh-oh.
Would you like to pause until?
All right. Well, he was almost done, so
In
why don't
30
you
seconds.
pick up on that question and hopefully he'll get
Certainly.
unfrozen.
And if he would like another 15 or 20 seconds afterwards.
Does,
Yes, I'll do
Um,
that.
Okay,
So
does,
so
does
the
Peter,
anti-Semitism free speech question.
yeah, this is, I was a university professor for over 20 years, and I really appreciate the importance of a university community where free speech and open dialogue with mutual respect is fostered. It's part of what we try to teach students at a university. We have seen many different protests across many different campuses in this country. Some of them have been completely peaceful. Some of them have had people from outside campus coming in to join protests. And sometimes they have moved towards rhetoric that can be called, honestly, anti-Semitism and hate speech. And we need to be careful because that is not part of a respectful dialogue, and it can be extremely hurtful. We've also seen on some campuses where Jewish students were barred from being able to get to class, and that is never appropriate. At the same time, we've seen other campuses where peaceful protests were interrupted by violent counter-protests, and counter-protesters were allowed to attack protesters with impunity. So I think it is very important that we not paint a broad brush of what is happening in one place relative to another. And we make sure that we're not using the bully pulpit of Congress to try to stir up this debate. What we have seen in Congress so far have been hearings where they try to increase the amount of dissension there is rather than allowing for respectful speech. And I will stop there, and hopefully John can join us. Do you want to wait until he can join? Up here he is.
Good.
Very good. Perfect
You're
timing.
back just in time.
We,
Put your audio.
we had
Okay.
we had a blackout here in Sag Harbor. Thank you, Lipa. So I don't know if that affected
Okay.
it, but
Okay. Well, you were just about finished, and
Yes.
then Nancy answered that question. Glad that you're back. So we're going to go on to the next question. Let's see where we are on the time. Okay. I wanted to go back to the question of voter fraud. Probably going to be a recurring problem in 2024.
you mean voter disinformation, right? Or do you mean voter?
No, I mean the question of voter fraud, like
Ah,
the saying that there is going to be voter fraud. And what would you, if elected, what would you propose to voters in the future that would assure that we don't have these kinds of problems?
who should go first on that?
I think me,
Yeah, I
right?
think Nancy, yeah,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So you get a little time to catch your breath.
right.
I think it's very important that we make the distinction between accusations of voter fraud and actual voter fraud. I'm sure you at the League of Women Voters know that there are very, very limited, almost non-existent numbers of cases of actual voter fraud. However, we have seen that on the Republican side, there have been concerted efforts to call into question the legitimacy of our elections, starting, of course, with Donald Trump, and not starting even in 2020, but in 2016, he started to talk about how if he lost the election, it would be because of fraud. So this is cynical, it is dangerous, and it has severely harmed our democracy. I think what we need to do is hold them to account for the lies and the misinformation that they are spreading. Here in New York, we are fortunate that we have boards of elections that are completely bipartisan, one of which used to be headed by our incumbent, Nick LaLota. And so surprisingly enough, he has not accused himself of inappropriate voter fraud and behavior. But he has not been a loud voice for talking about how we can believe the results of our elections. And we have no guarantee that he will be such a voice when he loses in November and when Donald Trump loses in November. We need to be holding them all to account for their lies and misrepresentations so that we can again give people faith in our democracy.
Okay. Mr. Avlon?
This is bedrock. Belief in American democracy. Person with the most votes wins. That we come together after a great fight to try to solve problems together. And that's the threat, the unique threat we're facing right now. We've never faced a major party nominee who running on an autocratic platform, praising dictators, who's using a lie about an election, not only to try to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in our history, but now is using that lie as a litmus test for party loyalty. And yet people like Nick LaLota can't wait to endorse him. They can't wait to fall in line. And it's some combination of cowardice and careerism that leads them to do it, to accept a lie. And we need to reject that because it's a critical threat to the credibility of our democracy, and it's intended to be that. That's why we do need to prosecute people who tried to overturn our elections. The election denialism needs to be held. Those people need to be held to account because you know why? If folks who try to overturn an election aren't held to account, it's just practice. It's just practice. They're going to try it again. And we already see that threat spiraling out. So we need to build that broad coalition, a broad patriotic coalition to defend our democracy right now, to respect the integrity of our election. And folks who have endorsed Donald Trump and haven't clearly condemned his lies are complicit in an effort to undermine our democracy. So we need to restore faith. We need to strengthen American democracy. We need to strengthen the guardrails around our democracy. We need legislation to do it. We need to understand that this is actually a cause that can ultimately unite us because this is our country. And the fact that faith has been broken in our democracy is a civic sin, and we need to repair that and move forward together.
Okay. This is the last question before the closing statements. And it'll start with Mr. Avlon. What are the issues that you feel most concern the residents of CD1? And how will you keep yourself apprised of the wishes and needs of the people in the district?
I believe part of the role of a member of Congress is to listen constantly. You know, one of the many reasons that I think Nick LaLota will be a one-term congressman is because he's unusually weak. It's not just that he doesn't live in the district and he's the only member of Congress that I'm aware of who's represented by another member of Congress. It's that he's never held an in-person town hall. Doesn't seem like that's part of the job, but it's a core part of the job. Take questions directly from folks. Listen, learn. That's part of the job. Do your job. And the hyper-partisan nature of our politics is making people fail at the basic part of the job. Listen, learn, bring people together. Represent your conscience and common sense, but also people's concerns. I think the number one thing we can and need to do is deal with the affordability crisis. It's rightfully frustrating, folks. Middle class has been squeezed for decades, and Democrats need to show we can do something about it. After all that talk by Nick LaLota and others about how they're going to fight to restore the state and local tax deduction, guess what? They've done nothing. You know why? Because Trump and the Republicans did it out of spite as part of a political stunt. And they're too invested in the red state, blue state divide to ever restore our state and local tax deductions. But if Democrats are elected and Hakeem Jeffries is speaker, we can and will restore the state and local tax deduction. And that's an average $10,000 back in working families' pockets. We can expand the child tax credit. These are concrete things we can do to restore faith, to begin rebuilding the middle class by delivering on the concerns that affect people. And over and over, we see from Nick LaLota and the Republicans, they're obsessed with fighting among themselves and with Democrats. We need to get to work fixing things. That's how we restore faith on the other side of this Trumpist virus, that we can make democracy work for working families again.
Okay. Ms. Goroff?
Thank you. The issues that I hear about from voters over and over again are, first, democracy and reproductive freedom. People are scared because they see the extremists trying to take away women's rights across this country. And they know that the Republican Study Committee that Nick LaLota is part of has proposed a national ban on abortion and has proposed a life begins at conception bill. And so they are worried. We also hear their concerns about affordability. It is so expensive to live here. People are worried that their kids are not going to be able to afford to stay here, or that they will not be able to afford to retire here. Part of fixing that is making sure that we restore the full deduction on state and local taxes, because if you're living in Brookhaven, you don't need to have a very big house in order to have a $10,000 tax bill. We also hear a lot of concerns about people with safety in their communities, whether that's about gun violence or it's about making sure the communities are protected against extreme weather and threats to our clean water. These are all issues that I am dedicated and committed to fighting, as we have already discussed. As a member of Congress, it is vital that we not only have town halls, which Nick LaLota has not, but also that we have open office hours. His office hours are a state secret. You have no idea, unless you are part of his inner circle, when you could find him or people from his staff. And any elected member of Congress has a duty to listen to the members, to their constituents. This is part of our absolute responsibility to our constituents, and one that I look forward to upholding.
Okay. Closing statements. Ms. Goroff, continue.
Thank you. I want to thank you and John for this really helpful dialogue. I think we covered so many issues and people will have a great idea of where we stand. And I want to thank the viewers for caring enough to give us an hour of your time so that we can spend it with you, introducing some of our positions on some of the issues. We are working hard here to flip this seat, and I am tremendously proud of the team that we have that started from the work that I did with the Long Island Strong Schools Alliance. I'm thrilled at the response we've gotten from voters who see my track record of accomplishment for the people in this district and how much of a contrast that makes with Nick LaLota, who just wants to talk and do political stunts and hasn't actually accomplished anything for the people here. So we are excited and we're working hard, and I would love to have people's support. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Avlon.
This is no ordinary time. This is no ordinary election. And we have a unique opportunity to win, to take out Nick LaLota, to flip the seat from red to blue. But it means building a broad coalition, firing up Democrats, reaching out to independents to defend our democracy. And that's why I'm so honored at the endorsements we've gotten. Just last week, and it was announced, we have the support of 1199 and the New Democrat Coalition, support from Tom Suozzi and Steve Israel, 6 out of 8 Democratic town committees, assemblymen like Fred Thiel and Steve Stern, 3 members of the county legislature. They all know that we have to win. Democrats can't afford to lose this fight. This is an opportunity to flip a seat, to make Hakeem Jeffries speaker, and each one of us has an opportunity to play a constructive role in this election by making sure that we're part of the path to victory, the Democrats are controlling the House, that we defend democracy and then build a new kind of politics. That's why I'm running for Congress. Those are the stakes of this primary in this election. So please, I'd be honored to have your vote. Join our cause, join our campaign, and together, let's win.
Okay. Well, thank you both for taking part in this debate. I hope it was very informative for the public. The League would like to thank CTV for producing the debate, which can be seen in its entirety on CTV's YouTube channel, either on your smart TV or on your computer. The debate election takes place on June 25th. Early voting starts on June 15th and extends until June 23rd. Please check with your Board of Elections as to the location and the time of day that the early voting will take place. And most importantly to everyone, your vote counts, particularly in a local election. It is a congressional election, but it's local. And in local elections, they're sometimes won or lost by a minimum amount of votes. And I'm sure neither of these candidates wants that to happen. So on behalf of the League of Women Voters and Eileen Mercer and Ann Marshall and myself, we wish you good luck on June 25th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you.
Bye.
Good night. Let's see. 8.